All right, we got Mr. Warren Martin on the line with us here. I got my orange Sunrise oil field studio hat on still because it's hunting season. I remember last time I brought that up, and I guess he was your upstairs neighbor. I didn't even know that. Is
Yeah.
that so? We're going to be having a little bit of a Warren talking about your past, your present, and your future here today. We're going to start with your past, which is Texas Tech. You're a alum of Texas Tech. We just published a story on the Crude Life today about Cody Campbell, Texas Tech lineman, Indianapolis Colts. Then he went into Double Eagle Energy, sold it to Diamondback in February, invested in the NIL program, invested in Texas Tech University, and it's one of the big stories of college football this year, Warren. Talk to me about what's going on from an alumnus standpoint, and then we'll talk about the oil and gas contribution. But just from an alumnus standpoint, you're in Kansas, but you still go, I mean, you're going to Oklahoma City at the end of this interview, and you're in Texas 2 weeks ago. So talk to me about what's going on with excitement.
Yeah, I'm here in Kansas, but we sponsor KU, we sponsor K-State, the WSU, we sponsor the three colleges that are here in Kansas, have sponsored them for years. And most of my contacts there know that I'm a Texas Tech alum, so I tend to go to all the games where, it's the Big 12. So I go to the Texas Tech games when they come up. I was in Lubbock, Texas when KU played Texas Tech. I was at K-State doing a halftime interview when K-State played Texas Tech. And so I've been, and that's pretty much every year. Big 12 tournaments right here in Kansas City, and I get to go see that a lot there. So I get to see a lot of my Texas Tech Red Raiders play. But it is a huge change that's taken place on the college campus. It's not an isolated incident. You got David Booth that's given what was it, $300 million to the University of Kansas for over all their sports. You got Stanford that got a $50 million contribution. It's happening in colleges around. Cody Campbell has become a big deal because Texas Tech is doing so well in football. They're very prominent, and there's been a lot. It's one of the places where a ton of money's been thrown in, and the program is responding to the money that's being thrown into there. When I went down to Texas Tech a few weeks ago, I was privileged to be able to go through the entire athletic training facility, the brand new athletic training facility, 300,000 square feet of training facility. It was amazing. I have never seen a structure that has been built like that. Got to go in coaches' offices, got to go see the basketball training facility. Just none of that was there when I was a student at Texas Tech, and it's completely changed the landscape of the campus there. And you walk into the locker room, they got a barber shop in the locker room. The locker room is bigger than the building that I have my office in, not just my office, but the entire building. It is huge. It's got an entire indoor practice field. It's got a 30-yard indoor practice field that has a huge screen that was funded by Patrick Mahomes, where you can bring out your offense, you can bring out your defense, you line them up facing the screens, and then on the screens, you put your opponent up on the screen, and you're actually using video footage of your opponent responding in games, and your team is able to respond to the video that's in front of them. I mean, it's amazing. And it is definitely changing the college athletic landscape. For me, it's definitely changing the advertising landscape. We use one of the big corner pieces of our marketing and getting in front of people, educating people about the oil and gas industry has revolved around college athletics. And it has dynamically changed that landscape to where, we're starting to have to pull out of that landscape because of how it's changed.
What do you mean by that? You're having to pull out of it.
Well, what I mean by that is when you're talking about, I'll give you a great example. When I was up there for the Texas Tech game, one of the things that they kept flashing on the billboard, if you go to any game, you're going to see your sponsors of the game that are going to be flashed up there. They put their logos up there. They talk a little bit about them. They give them the game ball at the beginning of the game, that kind
Hmm.
of stuff. one of their sponsors was the Texas Energy Alliance. And the Texas Energy Alliance is part of, with them, with Cody Campbell, have given $63 million. And in that Energy Alliance are companies like Double Eagle, like Diamondback, like Halliburton, the Texas Oil and Gas Association. Any one of those historically would have been able to sponsor a season, or at the very least an entire game, and have a game takeover where Halliburton or Double Eagle would be the game sponsor, and you'd hear about them throughout the entire game. The amount of money that is going into college athletics today, all of them together were just one sponsor at the game. And so we're seeing that up here where we sponsored a pro soccer team up here for years. And then the World Cup came, and Kansas City got the World Cup. And when Kansas City got the World Cup, there was a lot of interest in getting money into that venue. Well, the World Cup is completely separate from the regular season that we sponsor. But because of all of the money that was being thrown into the soccer community there in Kansas City, what happened is the club comes back to us. They tripled what our sponsorship was going to be. It didn't increase the number of eyeballs, didn't increase the number of butts in the seats. The CPM, the cost per thousand, just tripled because the World Cup was coming. Well, the World Cup was going to give us no exposure whatsoever. In fact, they would cover up all of our elements at the stadium. Most of the games wouldn't even happen at the stadium where our items are. They would cover those up. But because so much money was going into it, then that gives them the ability to raise the rates for everybody. And so what I think you're seeing right now in collegiate sports, there's been this fear that we're losing our school identities because players don't stay for 4 years. Players come, especially in basketball, they come for a year and they go to the pros, and they don't stay for 4 years. And that's been something that's been talked about a long time. Well, now you're seeing sponsors don't stay for 4 years. Sponsors are not local sponsors anymore because they can't afford to sponsor locally because the cost of sponsorship is getting so high to be able to get in there and get in front of the crowd that you're turning it in, you're getting to the point where it's just major corporate sponsors that are able to be able to take over those venues.
I didn't expect to go down this path with the interview, but this is one of the biggest issues right now in America that is not being talked about because it's coming on so many different levels. What you're talking about, Warren, is you're talking about the smaller mom and pop nonprofits now not being able to support what they were traditionally supporting, like your touchdowns for teachers type of a sponsorship, for example, because now the recipient needs 3 times as much for the entry level. Right. And as weird as that sounds to the average person, that's actually a reality. That's happening more and more and more to where in the world of media, we saw it first with the blogs, and then we saw it with the podcasts, and now we're seeing it with, I guess, to be the private partnerships and the NGOs with social media. Because the newspapers, which is the original media, okay, newspapers is, well, I guess Standing on a Rock is the original media, but newspapers would be the original mass media. And we used to joke, because I came from the newspaper industry originally, we used to joke that, our salespeople, they didn't have to leave the building because we were the only newspaper in town, so we had a monopoly. And so we were able to look at the media differently. We sold distribution. We actually didn't sell anything. We sold distribution. So when the blogs came in and freebies, and they were able to get the exact dollars that we were getting, whoa. Okay, who's buying that? What happened here? This is actually becoming more expensive to the taxpayer because you're changing the marketplace now, because you're saying that this undocumented, unestablished media outlet that you just decided to allow to pop up gets the same dollar amount that this old established. Yeah, it's the same formula that's happening, Warren, and I totally understand what you're talking about here because it's happening with ticket prices.
Mhm.
One of the issues with NASCAR and WWE and so you've mentioned soccer. That's a great one too. These used to be very affordable for the family.
Mhm.
When football and basketball and baseball got a little bit, baseball's somewhat still affordable, but when they started becoming corporate, they really priced the family out. And so you had WWE, you had NASCAR, and you had soccer basically that a family could still go to. Well, now they're being priced out. That's a huge issue right now because the same corporate takeover of sponsorships is that low hanging fruit because it's so much easier to go and sell one sponsor instead of 1,000 tickets. That's how they look at it, Warren. And I didn't realize that was happening on the sponsorship levels of events that are premium live events. I mean, a Texas Tech football game, that's 100,000 people live.
Yeah.
Michigan football, that's 100,000 people live. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
and it's not just staying within the local stadium. I mean, I'll give you another classic example. All of our assets that we have working with colleges right now, we've transitioned to radio. And the reason we transitioned to radio years ago, I mean, not long ago, 5 years ago, 5 years ago, we were sponsoring. We had commercials that would play during games, and we would work with universities, and we'd buy ad time during, sponsor their games, which would give us ad time that would allow us to run commercials on TV during their games. But a few years ago, the Big 12 took over the TV rights of all of the member schools that are within the Big 12. Well, as soon as they did that, that pushed us completely out of being able to advertise on TV because now you either buy for the entire Big 12 or you don't. And, it's a waste of money for us to talk about Kansas issues with a Texas Tech, or Texas audience down there that is supportive of Texas Tech. They have, it has no relevance. And so that pushes our cost per thousand because we have to look at what's our cost per thousand. Our goal is to impact Kansas citizens. And so if we're now having to impact everybody in the Big 12, how many of those are Kansans? That raises your CPM extraordinarily. And I see it really kind of pushing where we're going in college sports. I think they've got to get a rein on it. There was that New York Times article that came out, your article that came out that talked about Cody Campbell. One of the things that was referenced in those articles was the fact that in in the court case, the House versus NCAA, the antitrust lawsuit that they resolved limited schools to $20.5 million paid directly to athletes going forward. Well, that's what I've kind of advocated for from the beginning is if you're going to make it pro, they need to have a salary cap just like every other sport. You need to have some kind of a salary cap, but that doesn't limit how much you're able to pay for your facilities, how much you're able to pay for, all your equipment and the surrounding stuff. That's just what goes to student athletes is what we've limited. And I think there's a couple of long-term things that that are concern me when it comes to, because I've been working with advertising and sponsoring schools for a long time. I think there's a couple of them that really concern me. One is you're losing the local identity because you are pushing local sponsors out. They just can't afford to compete with nationwide corporations. The second one is what I call the church conundrum. Most people don't realize why most churches close their doors here in America. Most churches do not close their doors because people don't go there anymore. People don't support it anymore. Most churches in America close their doors because they can no longer afford their church building. That's the number one reason they close their doors, because they built these buildings. We have this, if you build it, they will come mentality. We build these huge buildings, and then the number of people that are coming to church can't afford that building. And over time, it just diminishes you down to where you have to close your door because you can't afford it anymore. And I'm heavily concerned that the way that education's going, fewer people are going to traditional 4-year colleges, well, 6-year colleges now, but fewer people are going to those traditional colleges. More people are going into tech schools, and so you're seeing kind of a change in the importance of education in America as regards to being able to get a beneficial job. And then you see these massive building programs that are taking place at universities across the United States. And, I have a concern that a few years down the road, you're going to see a diminishing of those schools because we're just trying to figure out how to pay for the buildings we have. How do you keep the lights on in the buildings that we have? Once, because this is going to be, at some point, there's going to be some level of control exerted over how much a college can spend on its athletic programs. Otherwise, you get into the situation where you're going to have colleges that are going to shut down their programs because they can't compete. And so, I think
It's interesting.
those are concerns going forward.
You bring up the church conundrum, or the church analogy, or the church comparison. And, if only there was like a Bible verse, maybe like Matthew 21, that would warn of such things, that would talk about, allowing the money changers into the temple. And somebody would flip the tables to make sure that the money changers weren't allowed. Anyway, sorry, I just, low hanging fruit there. I had to pull that one out of there. But that's true though, that's debt.
Yeah.
And what we're talking about there is, when a church goes into debt, they stop paying attention to the individual, and they start going after the corporate sponsor, which is the 1,000 individual. It's the grouping. So whether we're talking about from a church level, or we're talking about the new AI level, which is going to replace a lot of universities, whether we like it or not. And so we can see how really football is shaping our university system in connection with sponsorships, because the Texas Tech success has to do with the transfer quarterback from, I think, Stanford. And I'm sure Stanford has their NIL program, and up in my old stomping grounds, up in the Bakken, I mean, North Dakota State, they must have a pretty decent NIL program if they've won 9 out of the last 10 or 11 Division II championships. They call it 1AA or whatever they call it, but it's Division II in my mind. And so, when I look at the different NIL programs, how that money is administered and how the organization is put into it, that was my biggest takeaway from the Cody Campbell story. Was when I think of an oil and gas entrepreneur, I think of somebody who really understands the supply chain and quality of life. And
No.
you're talking about the barber, like they got a place where they can go get a cut and a shave. And I'm sure there's probably some nice weightlifting equipment and everything. I think of the old 80s movie, Johnny Be Good, where they have the steroids bar, I mean, that to that level of amenities, where they got somebody rubbing your shoulders and you got your steroid bar. So, when I looked at the Cody Campbell story, that's what I saw. I saw somebody who brought oil and gas innovation and the supply chain into Texas Tech, threw his money around. You're darn right he did, but everybody else is doing it. Everybody else is doing it. They're just doing it in a way that really should be showcased. That's how I looked at that story, Warren.
No, I think you're exactly right, and I think that what Cody Campbell did was great for Texas Tech. It's what all you talked about. Stanford got $50 million from Bradford, who donated $50 million to Stanford, and it's happening all over the United States. If you want to compete, if you believe in your school, if you love your school that you came from, it's how you enable your school to compete. It's how you support your school. If you want to compete, it's what you've got to do right now. I don't fault anyone for that, and I'm excited to watch Texas Tech. I love watching them play this year, and I love watching them play every year, but especially this year. But it's what you have to do, and you're exactly right. It's innovative people that are bringing in their innovation where they've been successful in other industries. Now they're using it to support the schools that they love and care for, to push them as far as they can. But even Cody Campbell admitted that, hey, this is going to come to an end. This is going to change. This is, in that article in the New York Times, it's going to change because there's only so far you can go this way before you break the system. And controls have to be put back on it in some way. What those will look like, who knows? But it's the game that we're in. It's the situation we're in, and you have to play in that situation. Unfortunately, that situation prohibits a lot of smaller organizations that used to participate in that arena, that where we can't compete in that arena any longer.
Well, I'll tell you one of the ways that smaller organizations like myself and yourself can compete is to get out and travel become a road warrior and get out and get in front of the people. And, for our standpoint, a lot of times, individual subscriptions and individual stops. And for you, it's same thing from a bridge club to weren't you just in Kansas City at some Federal Reserve event or something?
Not Federal Reserve. I was at COPUS, which is the Certified Public Accountants Petroleum Accountant Society. So it's it was the national gathering of all petroleum accountants from across the United States that come together to learn skills, learn what's going on in their industry. I was honored to be invited to be their keynote, and then I led a committee meeting, and we talked about stripper wells in the committee meeting. So it was a great time. A lot of those accountants come from the majors. And so as an opportunity to kind of share with them the other side of the oil industry, the mom and pop side, the stripper well side. But we, in the keynote, we focused a lot on global energy trends and where global energy is going and America's role in global energy, and how basically, in my opinion, the idea of transition is dead. We saw what Bill Gates said on Monday, where he came out and completely reversed his position on climate change. I don't know that I completely believe that yet. We'll so wait and see if the proof's in the pudding. But his statement was moving in the right direction. I will say that, from the standpoint of, what we need to be focused on right now is how in the world do we produce enough energy by the year 2050 for people not to be forced into poverty because they can't afford it any longer, because it becomes so limited that they can't afford it any longer. And, that is the biggest danger we face. The biggest danger we face right now is, how do we produce enough energy going forward, especially with cryptocurrency, with data centers, with AI coming on. That was all ramped up the amount of energy that we're going to have to create between now and 2050, above and beyond what we currently produce on an annual basis. And so, I think that those are all trends that we talked about in that keynote. And I think that that is going to be the topic for the next 10, 15 years, is how are we going to do that? And you're already seeing that change, because you're not seeing newspapers, you're not seeing blogs and posts and news stations talking about transition right now. What you're hearing them talking about is affordability, reliability, building the grid, nuclear power, bringing more power online. And because I think people are waking up to the reality of, we spent so much time trying to transition that we put ourselves in a hole. Now we're behind the ball on keeping up with energy demand.
Well, that was what I was going to ask you, was that, so if you're dealing with a lot of CPAs from majors, boy, that's about as linear of a thinker as I can imagine out there in the marketplace. And that's very advantageous for the question I'm going to ask you. One of the things, I came from agriculture, and, when I grew up, we'd be playing cards and board games in the other room. Well, the parents were in the other room, and they would be going over things. And I got to listen to the grocery store replace the farmer through my uncles complaining and family complaining and things like that. I got to listen to how the government slowly took over the farm by telling what they were going to plant, when they were going to plant, and what equipment they were going to use. And it was through a slow manufactured consent sort of thing. And I started seeing that in oil and gas about 10, 12 years ago. And are we there yet? When you come back from a CPA's meeting, are they talking about compliances over profits and like what is the discourse and what are the buzzwords that you are hearing? Because so much of the oil and gas industry has gone into renewables, our compliance department, and the energy transition became our compliance department. You're out there trying to pitch stripper wells, which is old school oil and gas. We got the technocrats out there talking about we need more energy than the sun powers for our AI stuff. So, what are you hearing from, what's the takeaway from a CPA from oil and gas executives? Because
Yeah.
their lawyers are probably standing right next to them. They can't even speak too much.
So to talk about linear thinking, I'll start with just a quick funny story. Is they introduced me as a keynote, and the stage was set up kind of on looking at the stage. It was on the right side of the room, and then there was a huge screen on the left side of the room where everybody could throw up their PowerPoints and stuff. So imagine a kind of a long linear room, and the stage is on one corner, and the PowerPoint's on the other. So they introduced me and I get up on stage. And as soon as I get up on stage, everybody in the room begins repositioning their chair to look at the screen. And I just stopped everybody. I was like, okay, I don't know what y'all are doing. I know you're accountants, but there's not going to be a PowerPoint on that screen. There's no reason to look at that screen. You can turn your chairs back. And they all started laughing. And I was like, are y'all going to be okay? Are y'all going to survive if we do the whole speech without a PowerPoint? And I gave them a hard time about that because we do get into those linear thought processes. I think there's a huge difference between the oil and gas industry and what happened in farming, what's happened in other smaller industries. And what's happened in those smaller industries is when farming, they didn't actually go in and say, okay, you're going to plant soybeans. They would come in and say, you can plant whatever you want, but if you plant soybeans, you get this subsidy. And you'd be crazy not to do it. And that's how they kind of bought you into it.
And insurance.
And insurance
too.
yes.
Yeah.
And so they use the subsidies and the insurance, and I mean, you'd be crazy not to do it. But the difference is generally the farmer, and usually most of the people that were in that operation had an understanding of what was going on throughout the operation. They knew it from the ground up. They knew the entire operation of what was going on. What we're seeing in the oil and gas industry, especially when you're talking about the majors, you don't have that. Whether I go and talk to pumpers, whether I go and talk to accountants, whether I go talk to producers, it doesn't matter. If I go to talk to service companies, in the oil and gas industry, we become such a technical industry, and that people specialize in their area. And so what I tend to find when I go is, like, I talk to CPAs, they have their own language and they have their own dialogue, but they a lot of times have very little understanding of how what they're talking about actually relates to overall oil production, how it relates to commodities, how it relates to products that are being produced, how it relates to impacting our nation they know their area. In the same way, I find that a pumper really has very little understanding about the refining process and the products that are made. I find that refineries have very little understanding about the production side of it. It's because we become so specialized that most of the people in the oil and gas industry have an intimate knowledge of what happens right before they show up, what happens while they're there, and what happens right after they show up. But then they don't have the knowledge base to connect that with the entire industry as a whole, and what their part is in the overall picture. And that's what I spend a lot of time is keying in on. Okay, here's what you do, but you realize how that impacts the rest of the world. You realize how that impacts America, your state, your county, your community. And my goal is to help them understand that to the point where they walk out of there with pride in their chest that they're doing a job that dynamically impacts from their community all the way up to the world. and makes a huge difference on bettering human lives.
So, what's your number one issue in Kansas right now? If you've got mostly independent oil and gas operators, um, a whole new report just came out on some emissions and climate change from the Department of Energy, and um, probably some changes coming into effect next year that I can't think of off the top of my head. So, what's going on with the independents?
Well, right now it's kind of what we've talked about on here before. Our biggest issue right now is the price. We've been hovering around that $60 a barrel mark for months now, and which is really unusual when it comes to oil as a commodity, that it is stagnant for as long as it has been, barely going up, barely going down, even with huge changes by OPEC, oil production by the United States. There's been very little movement on that price going forward. You had, was it JP Morgan or Chase? I can't remember which one, or which, I think it was Chase JP Morgan. But anyway, that came out with a study or a report this past week where they predicted that the average price of oil for 2026 was going to be $58 a barrel. So our biggest issue right now is really the price of oil, because we're marginal wells, we're right on those margins, and that margin, if you have $58 oil, then that puts some of our oil production, some of our producers selling oil below $50, because you can take $8 to $10 off of whatever the price is here in Kansas. And so, that makes it really tough for our margins. I think that is the absolute biggest number one issue. On the other side of it, what I'm spending most of my time on is that we have just produced, Kansas Strong has just produced, we hired an economist from the University of Kansas, and we did an economic impact study. And so we're focused right now on really communicating to our communities, our counties, and our state the importance of the oil and gas industry. The fact that 105,000 jobs in the state are produced by the oil and gas industry, that our industry accounts for 7.5% of non-ag related jobs in the state. And really kind of looking at those economic numbers, you realize that we have 12 counties in the state that get 20% or more of their tax revenue from the oil and gas industry. We have 14 counties in the state that 20% or more of the people in that county work in the oil and gas industry. So it's not just that it impacts our state as a whole, it dynamically impacts some of those rural counties where that industry is what that county depends upon. We have one county that 59% of its income comes from the oil and gas industry. And so we're really kind of working right now on helping people understand that, and how critical it is and crucial it is to the United States, but especially to our state, and really especially to our counties, so that our state and our counties can support our industry, because it is vital.
We've got Landman coming up here. I'm looking at my notes, looking at the time. November 16th, Landman 2, season 2, I should say, coming back. And some of the recaps are rerunning on the crude life. Warren and myself are doing some recaps. We'll be back by popular demand for our recaps on season 2. Boy, we're about 10 days away here, Warren. Now that I'm looking at the clock and the schedule, I think I might be behind on my timing of trying to get the 10 episodes out here. But
yeah, I really want to know what your definition of popular demand is, because I might need to start using it in my PR business. I like your definition of popular demand there.
Well,
I don't know how anything I'm on could be popular demand, my friend.
First and foremost, it's theater of the mind. First and foremost, it's theater of the mind. And so, no matter what, so it's the way it's going to be. But it is quite popular. We do have quite a few people that do watch it. We get quite a few emails, and some people that are excited for us to come back. And I'm excited to come back. And before we get into, maybe what some of our keeping an eye on type of a things, I got to tell you, I'm excited for Sam Elliott. To me, that legitimizes this thing more than Billy Bob Thornton did. And I mean, Andy Garcia is great. John Hamm was fine. Demi Moore, she's fantastic. Allie Larder looks like they plucked her right out of West Texas. But Sam Elliott, that's that to me. That is the home run right there. That's the touchdown.
Oh, absolutely. Sam Elliott's one of my favorite actors of all time. Scares me that he's coming on this show because I really don't want to be put in a situation where I have to criticize Sam Elliott because I hold him in such high regard. But agree with you 100%. My only concern when they put Sam Elliott on the show is, man, that kind of undermines Billy Bob Thornton's character a little bit there, but potentially. But we don't know how much he's going to be in the show. But definitely he adds a lot of credence to the show overall.
What I found interesting about the addition of Sam Elliott was that not only does it reach, men over 50, but it reaches the female demographic too. So in the same way that Demi Moore, who shaved her head for G.I. Jane for women empowerment, is now in this oil field movie, Sam Elliott coming in. Warren, to me, those two elements right there, even with Andy Garcia, which was in the Meg Ryan movie about alcoholism, When a Man Loves a Woman, which was actually written as a comedy. And then when they were doing the script reading, they realized there was nothing funny about this movie at all, and it turned into an abusive alcoholic movie. The casting is very mainstream. We're getting back to the Rock Hudson. We're getting back to the James Dean. Now it might not be the A-list young celebrities of Jacob. I forget his last name. I apologize. And the gal, the Allie Larder's daughter in the movie. But I'll tell you what, Sam Elliott, Demi Moore, Billy Bob Thornton, Andy Garcia. You're talking about A-list people right there.
Yeah. So out of all that you just said, what I caught was Demi Moore shaved her head for G.I. Jane. So Sam Elliott's going to shave his mustache for the Landman. Is that what you just said?
No.
That's what I heard. That's what I heard. No.
Oh, heck no.
Right here, Jason predicts.
Boy, I tell you what, if I froze up, I apologize. Whoo, boy, no. So Sam Elliott, my understanding is, and I was just going to look it up, he's going to be Billy Bob's father in this. So he's going to actually be the first generation oil. Billy Bob is going to be the second, and then Jacob, I forget his name in the show, Billy Bob's son, will be the third generation. So that tells a lot right there. That tells me that you're going to see three different generations of morals. I think you're going to see it cyclical. I think you're going to see Sam Elliott bring in that old school handshake is still as good as my word is oak type of a thing. Whereas Billy Bob's going to be caught in the middle of shareholders, ethics, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I'm trying really hard not to dig into what's coming very much because I really want to respond to it in an authentic way. And I'm a philosophy graduate with an art history minor. And one thing I know about art is there's two different ways of looking at it. There's the way that an art historian looks at it, where you go in and you understand the story behind it, you understand the mechanics, you understand the themes, the symbolism, and all of that stuff that you have. When you look at a piece, all of that comes to your mind. Then there's what the other 99% of the population does when they look at a piece of art. They walk in and they say, I like it or I hate it. Or it's okay. And if they like it, or if they really like it or really hate it, they may look into it a little bit. But most of the time it's just, yeah, I like it or I don't like it. And I think that's the way most people, we view shows. We either like them or we don't like them. If we really like them, we'll dig into them. If we really don't like them, we might dig into them just to have some ammunition to use against them. But most people just look at it and they're like, yeah, that's a good show. I liked it. And then they move on. And so I'm really trying to keep that approach to where that's the way I'm approaching it, by not digging into it too much before it actually comes out, so that I kind of have that same response and can tie that back to what actually happens in the oil and gas industry. But the one exception to that is exactly what you just said. You know, there's been some. If you read the brief statement about what this season is going to be about from Paramount, one of the things that they allude to is the discovery of new oil. And we talked the last season about Cooper and how Cooper was going back to the traditional landman model and was talking with landowners and was trying to put together a deal. And you're exactly right. Billy Bob Thornton's character is moving squarely into big oil, corporate America, dealing with all of that at the political level. And I kind of agree with you. I kind of think Sam Elliott's going to come in and he's going to be the one that reinforces Cooper and helps Cooper put together a deal that's going to compete with Billy Bob Thornton's company for oil production in that area. And it's going to set up kind of a dynamic there. I kind of think that's where we're headed. That's my prediction for the season. We'll see.
I think you're going to see probably Sam Elliott become the angel and Andy Garcia become the devil on Tommy or Billy Bob Thornton's shoulders, if you will. Whereas the prophet is going to be the cartel, and the ethics will be the old school oil and gas type of a thing. I think it's going to be great because when I was really thinking about this from a media standpoint, which I've been in the media since I was 10 years old, so even if I'm not considered an expert, I've learned a few things just by osmosis, by just doing the same things every day. But there was a show called Weeds, and it was a comedy on HBO or Showtime. I forget which one. And of course, you had The Sopranos, and even to a certain degree, Breaking Bad, which glamorized methamphetamines, for crying out loud. So The Sopranos kind of made mafioso cool, to where smoking cigars and doing some petty crime type mafia stuff. It was kind of cool, whatever. As long as you can have the bling to go with it. Well, and I'm not saying that's good or bad, I'm just talking about social acceptance here. And then when I take a look at Weeds, the way it kind of ushered in a lot of the medicinal marijuana in a comedic way versus a drama way. Now, when I take a look at Breaking Bad, which, my goodness, they did that formula with methamphetamines to where the city or the state of South Dakota joked about it. Meth, we're on it, and didn't realize it backfired on them, and everyone was cool with it because, hey, it's Breaking Bad, it's cool. I think it's going to fall somewhere in the middle, Warren. I do. I don't think it's going to go to the Breaking Bad meth dynamic, but I don't think it's going to quite go to the comedy route of Weeds. I do think it's going to actually be a positive for oil and gas when it's all said and done, because when I look at a year from now, the AI conversation is going to ramp up so much, and natural gas and nuclear, that's the only thing that's going to solve that. And natural gas is the only thing that's going to solve it in the interim. And so this, to me, really seems like it's going to be a groundbreaking year for Landman 2 in terms of making oil and gas just become mainstream in the same way Weeds made pot mainstream, the same way Sopranos made mafia mainstream, the same way Breaking Bad made meth mainstream. And I don't mean that in a good or bad way. It's just okay to talk about now without getting a fist in this face and a fist in that face. Okay, your turn to talk.
No, I agree. I agree with you. I think this year is going to be crucial for the show itself. First season, I think you saw a lot of people that were big fans of Yellowstone that began watching it. You saw a lot of people in the oil and gas industry, or had people in the oil and gas industry, start watching it. This is either going to be the breakout season or not. And, I think they're making some good moves to make it a breakout season where you get a larger audience. Certainly the first season opened up the conversation that I was able to have when I went place. Everywhere I went, they asked me, have you seen Landman? Every single place I went last year, over the past year, I've been asked, have you seen Landman? What do you think? So it definitely is opening up that conversation, and it's a good time. It's timed perfectly because you're seeing a huge transition in conversation about energy overall, moving away from transition, talking about affordability, reliability, and production, how much we need to be able to produce. You're seeing that swing already take place. So you kind of got a perfect scenario here for it to be a breakout show. And I definitely think to whatever degree it does break forward, it's going to benefit the oil and gas industry as a whole because it's going to have people talking about it.
Now, in closing, this is more for our listeners out there, just to give you an idea why we're doing this again. And, I mean, we're not breaking the numbers like Joe Rogan or anything like that, but there is an uptick on the Landman videos and interviews compared to the rest of the things we do. And even to go a step further, I know you've got a story which I'll let you share in a second here, Warren, but for me, I've had it happen a couple times now where I've been in Oklahoma or Colorado, and I've had people I don't know come up to me and tell me that they watched my YouTube videos of you and I doing these Landman reviews, and then they start asking me questions about the program. And that's when I know it's working. I've been in the media long enough to know, okay, are you investing your time, or is the stuff really connecting? Because there's certain articles that I got to do. I bet 100 people read, but I tell you what, those 100 people that read them, I need those 100 to read them. Everybody else, I know they're not going to, but this is different. This is where I know a lot of people are watching it that don't normally read an oil and gas article. And I know the same thing happened to you at the Kansas State Fair, you were telling me.
Yeah, it's happened to me many times where people have come up to us and have come up to me and said, "Hey, I saw an episode with you talking about Landman, and it was really good. Here's my question. You talked a little bit about this, and we went into, and it is really not just at the state fair, but really all over the place has opened up opportunities for us to talk about specific things within the industry, where they came from, where the ideas came from, what the reality is. It goes way beyond what the show is. Absolutely.
And the part that I found about it, this is what I really liked, was that it brought in a conversation of the industry that was non-polarizing out of the gate.
Right.
Meaning that they brought it in, they wanted to talk about it, they were interested, they wanted to know more about the industry. Was this show real? Was it not real? And now we just left with a very positive interaction. And that's the takeaway the oil and gas industry really has to walk away from, is that it's a slow process, but on these little individual bases, it's like that. It's kind of like the restaurant review. You got to have like 20 good experiences for them to tell one person, but one bad one, and they go tell 10, and those 10 tell 3, and all this other stuff. So anyways, go ahead. I'll let you have some closing thoughts here.
Yeah, and I think that's important. I think it's important for us to be able to have a real and realistic conversation, honest conversation. I'll give you an example of that. I read a book several years ago. It's probably written 10 years ago. Can't remember the name of it, but it's written by a University of Texas professor that was looking at how things are made. And she went into the chemistry behind how different things are made, and went down to the molecular level and talked about where these different products came from, how they were made, what brought them to be, how they became a product. Then she had an entire chapter on polymers, and she talked about all the ways that we utilize polymers to make different products. Not once, not one time in the entire book did she ever say that polymers come from oil and natural gas. We get our polymers from oil and natural gas. Not once did she bring that up, because that's a political statement to say that polymers came from oil and gas. And so she never brought that up in the book. And that's a huge chunk of the conversation that has been missing from many conversations for the past 2 decades, where people would allude to oil and gas industry, but really wouldn't discuss it because it was political. And I think that what this show does and what our shows do and what our conversations do with people, it really shows that we can have a honest conversation about the pros and cons of the oil and gas industry. I'm not afraid of that because I know that the pros far outweigh the cons of the industry as a whole. So I'm not afraid to talk about both the pros and the cons, but let's have an honest conversation. And then we can choose what we want to do for our energy future. But let's make that choice understanding that a polymer comes from oil and natural gas. Let's make that, make those decisions understanding that oil and gas provides 56% of the energy in the world. We need to understand those things to be able to make wise choices about our energy future.
Warren Martin is his name. Kansas Strong is the organization, and he's on his way to Oklahoma here as soon as we're off the air. And I got to get the show out to the radio stations here today. So, Warren, I bid you adieu, and we'll be talking in probably about a week and a half here.
Sounds great. See you soon.